Thank you.
Are we unmuted? Okay, sorry. All right, welcome to our study session. Today is May 18th, 2021. Let's start by indicating who's here, and let's start with Terry, who's joining us on Zoom.
Terry Bodden.
Julie Jackson.
Martin Bates, Superintendent.
Nicole McDermott.
Clark Nelson.
Connie Burgess.
And Karen Winder. Study sessions happen on the third Tuesday generally of the month, where we do exactly what it sounds like. We study some issues, some agenda items with our administrative team. And so today we have 2 information items, and turn the time over to Martin to set that up for us.
Thank you. These information items are carryovers from an earlier meeting. First, board members, it's been 6 or 7 months ago, I got a call from one of the board members saying, hey, what's this about the AB thing that some parent just told me about? I said, I don't know. And I talked to John and talked to some others, and they said, yeah, the principals are putting a proposal together. They've got some ideas about how to really expand concurrent enrollment opportunities for kids, and they're working on that. I said, well, make sure that we get input, make sure that, because of the GTI, we want all kids to be able to have access to all programs, but let's see what they come up with. We encourage that kind of stuff. So Craig's going to tell us about that.
Thank you, Dr. Bates. Good evening, Superintendent and Board. My name is Craig Stauffer, and I serve as the Leadership and Improvement Director over secondary schools in the Cottonwood, Taylorsville, and Cypress networks. And I appreciate the opportunity to share with you this AB calendar adjustment from the traditional pattern. I do want to note that this adjustment will affect the 8 traditional high schools, Connection High School, our GTI classes, and 3 of our junior high programs. I'm going to take this off if that's okay. So the adjustment stems from a request from the high school principals and our GTI principal to more align the regular schedule with our concurrent schedule with Salt Lake Community College, along with some other advantages that I'll share in just a moment. The adjustments were shared with the 3 junior highs that they affect as well, and each of those schools were on board with this adjustment. Many of them have students that participate in the high school program in math classes as well. I want to mention that this adjustment only affects the pattern, not necessarily any change to the approved calendar that you approved a year ago. The adjusted change is to place our A days on Monday and Wednesday, to place our B days on Tuesday and Thursday. That would meet the same pattern as the community college. And then we would have alternating Fridays that would we would alternate in order to maintain that AB schedule evenness. Late start will move from Monday to Friday for teacher PLC time. On this next slide, it is just the approved calendar and the traditional pattern or calendar change, or excuse me, the traditional AB schedule. The center box down at the very bottom shows the number of days during each term that are A and B days along with the total, and you can see those totals are very even all the way through, including the bottom. And then this is hard to read on the screen, but hopefully you can see those on either your screen or the paper that I've given you that shows that the number of Mondays that fall on an A day and a B day, and then the number of Fridays. So we just wanted to give that to you for informational purposes. This is the new pattern change adjustment, and you can see that all of the A days or A's are on Monday and Wednesday, B are on Tuesday and Thursday, along with that alternating A and B schedule. There are some days where the A days are repetitive so that we have an even number of days because we have holidays that generally fall on Mondays and Fridays. So those days, but we tried to place those in a way that would be surrounding holidays or at the end and the beginning of each term. And that allows for teachers to be able to teach in blocks and then rotate those blocks, ending on an A day or ending on a B day, and then beginning the next block on a B day and rotating through. And I'll kind of explain that a little bit of how that will adjust their teaching a little bit. Down at the very bottom, it does have those days. The only thing that switched is that the number of A and B days changed by 1 based on that. So instead of having more A days, we have 1 more B day. There is one adjustment that we wanted to show, and that is with moving our PLC time to Fridays. Because of the extra holidays that fall on a Friday, there are 2 less PLC times, but that does even the pattern or even it out with the junior high and elementary schools as well. So some of the reasons why the principals made this request: this allows high schools to align with the college schedule. Students can now participate in more college class options, allowing for a greater chance to earn a Salt Lake Community College certificate of completion. If you're unaware of that, that's something that's new, that if they complete that, that's transfers to any school in the state other than the private school, and that allows them to have a completion of their general education.
Can you just clarify that? Is that through concurrent enrollment, or is that physically going to Salt Lake Community College and taking a class?
So that's through concurrent enrollment through Salt Lake Community College, and then it would be transferable if they wanted to go to University of Utah, Utah State,
So they
that type
would
of
take
thing.
it at their high school.
Oh, I apologize. I didn't hear that very well. So I see what you're saying. Yes, that is a combination. Because of this, the students now have the option to be able to not only take concurrent classes at the high school, but if they would like to, they could take those classes at the community college as well, which allows a combination along with AP classes that help for that certificate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and actually the handout I'll talk about in just a minute that clarifies that a little bit more as well. And then high school and GTI, the GTI can hire adjunct professors for concurrent and advanced courses. So for just a moment, if you would look at the handout that I gave you, the very top part of that handout is that certificate of completion. And what it explains, I tried to put it all in one format so that it was a little bit easier for you to be able to look at. The courses or the numbers that are highlighted, and I believe it's in purple, show the number of high schools that actually offer that class at their school. So for example, in English 1010, all 8 high schools offer that class.
Craig, which one are you on? Which?
It's blue,
Sorry, this very.
This one?
it's the
Yeah.
blue number.
You
I
said
don't see any
purple, but it's
purple. It's
blue.
blue?
Yep.
I don't see color. What color is it? Blue, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Purple's close to blue.
It's
It's really close. I thought it was a good guess. The 2010 is the same way, that all of 6 of the 8 offer that class, but that wasn't added to the GTI schedule. The concurrent courses that are offered at the GTI are actually in yellow. And those are new classes that we were able to post for and add due to the fact that we were able to make this adjustment. And so this kind of shows you that high schools offer certain courses, and then the GTI concurrent courses are those that are all offered in the lighter blue color, and the yellow courses are the ones that were added new due to the fact that we were able to make this pattern change. Yeah, and so if you look at an example like communication, as a principal at Hunter High School, the teacher that I had that taught communication, when she retired, it was very difficult to find somebody who was able to teach communication because the requirements now in college to teach a concurrent class is that you have to have a master's in that subject area, not just in education. And so it's becoming more and more difficult to find teachers that have those endorsements. This does allow for us now to be able to post and hire adjunct faculty from Salt Lake Community College or other colleges, because it's something that they can now fit in their schedule that they were unable to do before. And so that's why we were able to post for those and to add those new classes.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask the questions as I have them. So does this mean that you have already offered these on the high school registration card, and there has been enough interest in it that you can fill a class next year? Is that
That's
just-
correct.
that's
That
what-
was one of the things that back in December, when we kind of finalized this, this plan or proposal that we've been working on, when we all met in December and then kind of finalized our thought process there. And at that time, Ben was able to let everybody know, let's put these on our schedule, and so they were available.
Okay, and then my other question is, as we're talking about these other teachers, they just have to have a master's in that subject area. They don't have to have a master's in teaching. Is there something that crosses over as far as, I mean, we have requirements of our teachers and like, I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but not all college teachers are great teachers. They understand their material, but they're not always the best. Is that a nice way? That's not a nice way to put it. Anyway.
They may not be the best high school teachers either, right?
It's true, it's true. So, I mean, my concern is for these kids who are not college kids, who are going to end up taking these courses from these teachers. Is there a certification that they go through as we pull them into the high school? What does that look like?
They have to be, if they're an adjunct faculty at Salt Lake Community College, then they're vetted through their process. But they also then go through our posting process and recommendation. Our principals call for recommendation. So you're right in the fact that if they are an adjunct professor and they're qualified to teach this class at the college, would they have an educational degree? You would think so, but I can't speak to every one of those specifically.
So do we just, I mean, is that?
They don't take the same kind of pedagogy class.
Right, which I'm wondering why we require that then of all of our teachers if we're not going to require it of these
No,
teachers.
let me
Oh, sorry.
let me turn that around a minute, Nicole. For them, for USHE, for the Utah System of Higher Education, to accept a class for college credit, the teacher, who most likely is one of our high school teachers, has to have a degree, a master's degree in the subject. So I think you're looking at it from the other direction, where really it's from our direction being accepted to offer credit, college credit, that's going to be most of the people. I don't know that I said that very well.
I think she's saying they don't have to get a teacher's certificate, which means they don't have to learn how to manage a classroom or create curriculum or manage
PBL
kids with special needs.
Yeah,
That is
or-
what you're saying.
That's more my concern.
And I'm saying the vast majority of these are our teachers with teaching certificates and a master's degree in the subject, that they're now going to be able to teach these concurrent enrollment classes. Now, when a high school wants to hire an adjunct professor to teach a specific one that the school doesn't have a person for, then they're going to screen as they interview people to make sure that that person has pedagogical skills as well as content knowledge.
So we post, like, for example, when these classes were posted, they were posted and available to all of our teachers as well. And if there was not there was not somebody who applied because they didn't have the qualifications, then that at least provides that option for a adjunct professor, a professor at the Salt Lake Community College, to be able to apply for that and teach it. And they would be teaching it primarily right now at the GTI, but that option could come available if there was a big enough request at each individual high school. Right now, each of the high schools are doing the very best they can to try to hire people in all of these positions. But with this new one-year certificate, it's just put an added need for us in Granite School District to be able to make sure that we offer every class available so that they can receive this certificate.
Sure, and I want you to understand, I love this idea that we're giving kids this opportunity. I think that's so important. I have that concern that, especially as we have PBL coming up and it's going to be adopted more and more by, as it comes out through the high schools, do they have the training? Are they going to be grading on a completely different system? Are kids going to be, are we going to have the same requirements of these teachers? Do they have, like Julie said, the background to be able to discipline or to, classroom management, things like that? And if we require this of our teachers who work here, it just seems like, are we we're making an exception to the rule, I guess, is what I'm hearing, that we're allowing them to not have a teaching certificate, not be certified beyond their profession. Does that make sense?
It does. The only example that I can think of is that I had an adjunct professor teach Italian at my school, and they did it within our eminence rule. And so that was the only person that I've seen that didn't actually have an educational certificate and have gone through the whole process. But if they're at the school level, then we have a system that we can monitor and help them improve. And at the GTI, they have that same system to be able to help them. So I think that right now we weren't thinking, did they have the pedagogy and skills to be able to do classroom management, but more so, can we make sure that we offer the classes that they need and make sure they're available for anybody who is on that college track and wants to be able to receive that certificate?
Sure, okay.
Can
I
you,
just,
can
sorry,
I follow up on your
that's
question?
just my concern about that specifically,
Sure.
so.
Yeah, let me follow up. You said the vast majority. Do you have a way of quantifying as we stand today as to how many that represents? How many teachers would be adjunct and not have the pedagogy background versus those that just have a master's degree in the subject matter?
What I do have with this specifically is of all of these classes, and I believe there was 13. I want to count real quick because I want to quantify for you. No, so there was 10, and when I talked to Ben, he said that 7 of them will be coming from the Salt Lake Community College. That's for these specific classes here. As far as quantifying,
When you say Ben,
That's Ben Anderson.
Ben Anderson, sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben Anderson from the GTI.
principal of the GTI, because most of these are, the yellows are all GTI.
Yeah, the yellows are all just GTI classes. All of the other classes that are offered at the individual school level, which happens to be the second page, it's actually multiple pages. So if you turn the page over, that's a really, really small version of the next 2 pages that makes the next page that's front and back. And that tells you what each individual school offers based on the actual concurrent enrollment classes. So if the schools are listed at the top, and then as you work your way down, that shows you the individual classes that are offered at the school level. And those individual teachers at the school level have all has a teaching certificate, a bachelor's degree, of course, and then a master's.
These are all licensed teachers.
Correct,
7 of these 10 may not be, might be, but may not be.
correct.
What, can you tell me what an adjunct really means?
So an adjunct professor, for example, at the Salt Lake Community College, they may have a bachelor's degree or some type of a license. And Donette's coming up. Maybe she's going to explain it a little bit better.
All right, so first of all, teachers that are adjunct are no different than any other teacher we hire that comes in on an eminence license. So to be clear, we have those all over the system right now. So let me tell you what some of those are. Yeah, we have all kinds of teachers that are eminence teachers. So they do have modules through the state they're required to take because they're now on an LEA and you guys sign off on all those licenses. The vast majority of these individuals work at the GTI. Engineering, nursing, all those other kinds of professions that don't have a teaching license. So to make you feel a little bit better, Nicole.
But what, just to close that loop, an eminence license
Yes.
is one where the State Board of Education has said, you're eminently qualified in this area. So to teach 1 class or 2,
Yep.
we're not
one or
going to
two.
require you to go through the whole program. You just need to do these pedagogy modules.
Well, the modules are, some of the modules are behavior management, some are special education, et cetera. But I want to be really clear about the GTI because this is really important to know. The GTI actually created the pedagogy courses that we teach here for all ARL teachers more than a decade ago. So they have those modules ready and they do that as part of their regular PD over at the GTI. We do not have a lot of eminence subject matter in high schools. But you mentioned a few that exist, but that is, I mean, there's engineering at Olympus High. I can tell you that one right off the bat, but there are very few that are there. So I don't want you to think that we throw them out there with no training and no pedagogy knowledge and no background information. They are licensed. They're just licensed in a different way. We could not have all of those people go through an entire teaching program. It's untenable, which is why the licensure track exists. But I want you to feel safe in knowing that we are providing the pedagogical needs, and there's a special education module. There's other ones by law they have to take. So we're not just throwing them in there. It's also not new. So hopefully that's helpful.
Well, and we actually get that better through us, the GTI, that if a student were to go to the college and get on the college campus. Sure. Which they're still, they're allowed to do that.
But to Julie's specific question, colleges and universities have people that they hire. they hire full-time faculty who are tenure track faculty. They also often reach out into the community and hire somebody to teach a course or two. Those professors are called adjunct professors. So when a high school teacher teaches a class and college credit is awarded for that effort, that teacher is an adjunct professor. They're adjunct to the university.
Like you're an adjunct
and
professor, correct?
But
They
they're
don't-
still hired by us. For some reason, I was thinking it meant that they were both hired by Slick and by
The
us, but
community
no.
college- The Salt Lake Community College is staffed largely by adjunct professors that don't have anything to do with us. They're just
Mhm.
people that they've hired to teach this course or that course. University of Utah, they're mostly tenure track professors with a handful of adjunct professors. So adjunct just means somebody that's not full-time tenure staff
Gotcha.
at the university.
with no contract.
Right.
So they're,
Oh, I see.
Okay,
Continue on.
Sorry, that was a long question.
go on.
Continue on.
Okay, it helps for using part-time teachers. Oftentimes, our part-time teachers have some other type of a job, and this makes that schedule more consistent for them, at least through the Monday through Thursday. That consistency of Monday through Thursday helps students know their schedule. As a principal, I enjoyed getting to greet students each morning as they came into the building. And probably at least 100 times every day, they would always, that's the first question they ask, what day is it, A or B day? So we will still have to do that, of course, on Friday, but that's something that.
One day a week instead of 5.
One day a week instead of 5, yes. This change with PLC late start times will move to Fridays, will better align with the junior high and elementary. We are still looking at a late start Monday for the high schools to keep that integrity of PLCs because there's so many after-school activities.
You said Monday. Is that Friday?
Late start Friday instead of late start Monday. But yes, so it aligns at least during the same day, but the time will be a late start rather than an early out like junior high and elementary.
Can you help me understand a little better why that aligns with the elementary students?
Well,
that
it
are-
just aligns during the same day. That's really all it is so during the same day, if parents are making some type of an adjustment, they know that they don't have to do it on a Monday 1 week and a Friday at the end of the week, that hopefully they can at least adjust just Fridays. That's what.
Right, but that doesn't have anything to do with PLCs. My question's about PLCs. How is because that bullet point is about PLC late start time that aligns with elementary and junior high, and I'm just not seeing the correlation.
And all I was trying to correlate is it's just on the same day. So
Okay.
I'm sorry, that didn't make sense. Nicole?
So would you, I mean, in order to coordinate it with the junior high and even elementary, would you think about doing it in the afternoon instead, getting an early out? Because, no?
So the trouble with the high school.
Sorry.
Walk the walk, John.
As you're walking up there, because I mean, I'm expressing this because as a secondary teacher, it would be nice for the high schools, for singletons, to be able to PLC with their feeder elementaries and junior highs.
It would. The challenge with the high schools though is if you do an early out Friday for the high schools, a vast majority, not a vast majority, but a large portion of your high school teachers are involved in extracurricular, regardless of whether it's athletics or if it's performing arts, whatever it might be, or clubs. There's a lot of clubs that take place and so forth. They would get distracted on the Fridays and the early out because the teams would still want to practice or perform or practice as soon as school got out because they wouldn't want to release the kids, have the kids go home and then come back for practice. So what they would ask, or the constant push for them on the administration would be, is it okay if I just miss this PLC? And then they would be missing large portions of their PLCs throughout the year, depending on when their activity fell throughout the year. Does that make sense? So, and I trust me, that would happen because what the students would ask for is, please don't make us leave and come back. Can we just do this right after school gets out? And then the teachers would then put the pressure on the administration and say, can I miss that PLC? The other trouble we would have is this current schedules don't align. So the junior high gets out at a different time than the high school due to transportation. And so if you try to align that, it would still create havoc with transportation.
Yeah, we collapse on top of everybody's schedule, we can't get them.
Yeah, that's what Don was running up here to say. is that it would create problems with our transportation.
Okay.
So literally, what happens right now with the high schools, and we did this a long time ago, and I remember being part of the high school group that did the proposal to do the late start Mondays so we could do them, is we still run transportation at the same time. Students that want to come early still come early, and they can either access the media center, or they can do some studying somewhere else on campus, because they still ride the bus at the same time, and they'll do the same thing. So it doesn't interfere with transportation at all. Okay? I hope that answers that question.
And I can give a specific example of that. When I held my leadership team at Hunter, the vast majority of those people that were involved with either clubs, organizations, or sports were my go-getters. And so they happened to be on my leadership team. And so they specifically asked to have leadership team in the morning so that they were able to attend and be a part of that decision-making. The last bullet, schools can utilize Fridays to implement intervention, extension, and retakes during the regular school day. So there's still the expectation that we have a normal school day, but because it's a little bit of a shortened schedule, they could include, we pull our kids out for a lot of reasons, whether it be assemblies or getting their pictures taken or all of those things. And so the principals have promised that they will hold that Monday through Thursday as instructional time and try to put some of those extra things on Fridays.
Since you brought up the time, what is the time difference on Fridays? How short are the classes?
So it's shortened by 1 hour. So they're about 55 minutes. Is that right? 50. I don't have a schedule sitting right.
I
in
don't
front of me.
remember. It's been too long.
And I
since
can't
taught on the
remember
EV.
either exactly. So it's shortened by 1 hour. So each class is about 1 hour long.
So does that, I mean, over time, is that a significant enough time because A days are going to be hit harder on that Friday? Is that going to be a significant amount of time? Did you guys crunch the math on that?
So,
As far as,
but
except that when there's a holiday on the Monday, that's automatically an A day. So is there,
Yeah, that's what they did. They addressed that on the Fridays to balance it out.
and we do, like you said, in that calendar at the very bottom, it does show that there are more A days on Friday. And so there is a
so with
reduced
more-
time.
That's what I'm saying. With more A days on Friday, that means the A days are going to have less time in class, less
Sure.
seat time. So did you do that math? How much less time are they having?
I did not do that math. Sorry. I know that one thing that we did think of is that it would be better to make sure that we at least had that day versus, so that's why we made sure we rotated them and put in more A days in the calendar versus just going A, B every other one on Fridays to make sure that they at least had that time.
Sure. And I feel like that's an unfair hit to the A days because they're going to have less time overall.
Except when you look at the whole thing, they're pretty even, so they even out.
Right, but there's more A days on Friday, which means that there'll be more days that are shorter.
No, if you look at the other days, they've evened it out, is what they said.
So it does even out A, B days, but what Nicole, I think you're trying to say is because each class is now only an hour, maybe 65 minutes versus 90 minutes, that they're going to get a little bit less instructional time.
So so on here, it does say A days, Mondays 16, A day Friday 16, B days Mondays are 17, and B day Fridays are 15. So it's not too much different.
Except you look at the total days, 88 A days and 89 B
Right.
days.
And so Nicole, it sounds like if it's, let's say it's 20 minutes lost twice, so it's 40 minutes, there's 40 minutes less instruction, A days than B
So,
days because
okay.
of the Fridays.
That's only one day for the.
The answer is relatively, it's not
So it's
terribly
not too bad.
significant.
Okay, I just wondered how that was addressed, because it sounds like you guys have talked about it. I just wondered how. you
We
guys
did talk about it, but I didn't compile it for you, so I apologize
Okay.
as far as exact number.
Well,
of
if
minutes.
this is a fair representation, that there's 16 Fridays that are A days and 15 that are B days, then that's not too much lost instruction time.
I thought that was the old schedule. The new one says 17
Yeah.
A days on Friday and 14 B days.
In order to
Fridays.
even out those days, we ended up
Yeah,
having
so it's a difference of
17. So there should be the next schedule
Am I
down.
looking at a different one?
It's the next slide after that one that has
16
and 15.
So 3 times.
So essentially an
So
hour
3 times.
over the year.
Oh, yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah, so it's a
Right?
total
3
of
times
3
20 minutes.
times.
An hour over the year or over the term?
Over
the
the
So,
year.
well, that's,
year.
if it's a 90-minute, if it's a 90-minute class, that's an hour and a half, isn't it? Because if they're reduced down to an hour,
Right.
so that's essentially missing one class, right?
Essentially missing one class, but if our principals do this right, which we will ensure that they do, if they are able to put a lot of those activities on that Friday, it's going to save more than a day.
Okay.
The last slide, students will have a consistent Monday through Thursday schedule. However, they're going to need to communicate regularly with their students on what day it is as far as Friday. And we encourage our principals to communicate weekly with their community. So that should be something they'll be able to do. But as Dr. Rage said, they'll still be having to let them know at least one day a week instead of 5 which day it is. And then by moving Fridays to late start, there will be 2 less days, which we talked about with what Nicole just talked about overall.
Yeah, can I ask some questions there? I've received considerable feedback from teachers with additional concerns or disadvantages beyond these 2 bullets. And one of them is for athletes, that if there's a Tuesday, Thursday, for example, soccer schedule, they're going to miss the same B day multiple, throughout an entire term in essence, or at least on travel days. So that third and or fourth periods of the day that require travel to another school, they're going to be missing 2 B days in a row, plus potentially, not basically going a week and a half. If you have an off week there where there's no B day on Friday's an A day,
Sure.
you could go an entire week plus without almost 2 weeks without those teachers seeing those athletes in those particular classes.
So Mark, I just wanted to point out that my daughter had soccer days on Monday, Wednesday. So with the rotating schedule, she took competitive athletics, which was the last period of the day on purpose. So when they miss class, they're not missing a core class. And this actually works better if they have a competitive athletic class for the afternoon or the.
But only for one gender, because those competitive athletics classes, yeah, exactly. So it may work well for one gender, it may not work so well for the other gender, depending on that competitive athletics class where it falls for the given gender. Yes.
If the principals on their schedule correctly, I guess, looking at all those things, they could actually make it work so that they're only missing competitive athletics, which is what they're doing, that's what they're getting on Thursday for.
But am I missing something? Because I still think that's only limited to one gender in that way, because you can't have the same gender with the competitive athletics on the same day. They rotate days. Yeah. Yeah, and basketball, I mean, it's, yeah.
So I think if they're looking at their schedule correctly, they might be able to put that as a competitive athletic class, which actually is better if it's that class.
If it lines up, yeah. I would agree if it lines up.
But what
it's-
you're saying is that accommodating for this with athletes would require making sure to have a very adjusted schedule,
But
which
I-
is,
What they try to do
is kind of a
is
headache.
like our principals are really trying on that.
Well, the other thing is
Mine haven't.
we also work with the counselors to try to figure out a schedule that works for them and
Yeah.
One of the things, we have 8 high schools who are in several different regions, and so they are with other schools like Jordan Canyons, those schools, and they have talked about that specifically as we develop this plan, that they're going to try to visit their schedules so that a lot of times, for example, basketball plays on Tuesday and Friday, and to look at that same type of a concept as we make this adjustment.
There was also the feedback, this one came from students of like having B days right together is tricky, and then having A days Wednesday and then not again until Monday. That those things, both of those 2 things are things that could be tricky in their learning, in their opportunity to learn. I think that all of them also said they can be overcome. But when we were just discussing what are the disadvantages, that was one that definitely came up from students' perspective.
And that is a great point. One of the things that we've looked at and they've shared with each other is if you put them in primarily 2-week blocks, then you're teaching an even amount of days, even though you sometimes have those days back to back. But what it does do, as a teacher, I often got better after teaching my A day if I had the same class on B day. And so my B day students got maybe the best lesson from me. That now adjusts so that every rotation of block, my B students get the first lesson and my A students hopefully get that better lesson. So it is going to take a little bit of organization, that's for sure, on both parts, teachers and students. But I think it would advantage students and teachers as far as giving the best lesson to all.
Related to that, a piece of feedback I got from a parent on this was that Thursday, Friday back-to-back, be it both B days, both A days, is there going to be the kids are kind of wired to have a day in between to get projects or homework, or, sometimes life gets busy. And so it's really nice to have that cushion evening where you don't have to go home Thursday night and then you have another B day and bam, it's due that morning. Is there going to be any training to teachers, or is that just the expectation? Or do we just say, okay, kids, this is your new reality, and just go ahead and do it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Sure,
Is there going to be
definitely.
any leniency on that end as far as what if kids don't have that evening to get it done?
Sure, and as principals spoke, they're going to get together with PLCs so that they can plan out those blocks, and they'll have to be able to work that in. And that's kind of been, we've had this adjustment of this crazy year, and we felt like this was a great opportunity because they're already used to having a little bit of a strange Friday to implement it now. And it will take a little while for everybody to get used to, but I think overall, it will, once they work through it, it will get better and better.
One of the suggestions that I received multiple times in that regard is an 8-period day on Fridays, so that when you mention interventions, that more perhaps closely aligns to that opportunity to have an intervention, albeit a little bit shorter or maybe a lot shorter on Friday, but to have that opportunity each week. Was there some discussion amongst your group?
There definitely
about
was
that?
some discussion looking at that being an intervention type extension day. There's a few problems with that, of course. GTI students we'd have to have a place for them to maybe do some type of a Zoom lesson to still be able to participate in their classes. But one of the most difficult things is if I have a part-time teacher, now they have to show up every Friday, and that's a contract issue that Donnette would be able to speak about. So there's some things that made that we feel like that still can take place, and they've actually looked at some options, but it would be very intermittent rather than every single day, and it would be somewhere we're close to the end of the term to allow kids to do those retakes for PBL, that type of thing, versus doing it every Friday.
And is that something that, when you talk about the customization of an individual high school and a principal and customizing their schedules, is that something a specific principal could do at their high school based on how many kids they had attending a GTI or the DGTI versus it being applied across the board to all 8 high schools?
What they're looking at right now is they're looking at 4 potential days that are right close to the end of the term as something that would be that all of them would participate in and then be able to communicate with GTI. But every week we have to communicate with the GTI if we have an assembly that day, whether it be on a Monday through Friday. And so it's the expectation of the principal to reach out to the GTI and let them know that we have this special thing going on. So to have them do it every Friday would be not something that we would allow at the district level for sure. But if we can work together to do something that affects all and is good for all, then that's an option.
30 minutes is really short.
Yeah, that's fair.
I talked to a teacher and the first thing that was said was, oh, but we have 2 A days together and then 2 B days. And finally it was, oh, well, we can work that out. So I was grateful that, that person at least was willing to work hard to figure out how to do 2 in the same, 2 days with the week. But I want to thank you very much, because if we can expand that concurrent enrollment for our students it's a huge thing for them. So if this benefits them in the concurrent track, thank you. Thank you. That's, what we've wanted forever. So thanks very much for working and striving to get that down and even more down the road.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I say something?
Oh, Terry, we can hear you loud and clear, dude.
Good. I know there are a lot of advantages. There are also disadvantages and some unknowns, but I know our people will work to correct those unknowns and make it as good as we can. I just applaud our administrators and people for looking for more opportunities to give our students a chance at concurrent enrollment. Let's give it a shot, and we'll have to make some adjustments. We've done that in the past and we'll do it in the future, but I thank these people for the concurrent enrollment opportunities. So that's all I want to say.
Thanks, Terry.
May I ask 2 additional follow-up questions, hopefully? First is on the certificate of completion from Salt Lake Community College. Is that something that can be completed by a student without having to ever visit a Salt Lake Community College campus at all?
Currently, there's one class that they have to take at the Salt Lake Community College. And on that paper that I gave you, it is in green, I believe.
The lifelong wellness.
It's a 1 credit lifelong wellness class. James,
You don't know this, but I've been working with Denise Huftelin to get rid of that class.
yes. And
Did I hear somebody say? Because that, Clark, that very point, that keeps kids from completing it because they're not able to make that piece. So she's been, she counters with some endowment of scholarship money that she can make happen. And then we talk about transportation and different things. So we're really trying to work a way around that class so that kids can earn this. And I don't know that you all know this, for every one of our high schools, all 8 of our high schools, Salt Lake Community College is where the vast majority of their students go to college, those that do go to college. And the more we can connect them early, the more the greater the chance of them going to college and completing something there. And so Denise is really, she's the president of the college. She's really motivated to make this happen, and we are too. And so we're working on that very point.
Thank you. Last item for me. Can you tell me how many of the high schools have in their fax departments preschools that come to the high school?
I know of Hunter and Cottonwood right now.
Taylorsville does.
Taylorsville does as well.
Taylorsville.
Do they all, perhaps?
I think Olympus does too.
I know at Hunter, we held our preschool Monday through Thursday is how we held ours. So
Okay. That's one concern I've had expressed to me as well, is that my understanding is it's a Tuesday to Thursday program for the preschool kids. And therefore, if that's the case, that effectively limits the students who are on A day, for example, will only get those preschool kids 1 day a week rather than 2 days a week if you have that class on a B day. And that's a concern that has been expressed from both students and teachers.
And their concern was also in connection with the preschool teacher, that there's not, and maybe this is a Donette question, but that there was not enough funding to pay the actual preschool teacher. So they would run it Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday would be their prep day, and that would alternate every other week. And that was the advantage of it. So is there a way to employ those preschool teachers Monday through Thursday? Or how is that, was that addressed at all, or was that thought of?
that's something that was thought up, and Terry and I have actually talked about it. And so we're trying to come up with a plan that will be able to work so that those kids will be able to participate, and it'll be economical for the parents to be able to participate. And I think rather than the 2 days, 3 days a week. So we are looking at it. That is something that Terry and I are looking at. And we'll come up with a
Terry Roy
solution.
Lance, is that?
Terry
Yeah, just
Roy,
to clarify,
yes,
I think it's a
apologize.
4 day a week versus a 3 day, not 3 versus 2, because currently it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday that the preschoolers come.
4 day week.
Yeah, okay. Just
Oh,
wanna
so
make
at Cottonwood, they have a 3 day week. That's different than my previous school.
Cottonwood and Taylorsville both.
And is Taylorsville 3 days a week as well?
Yep, Taylorsville's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday.
Okay. And I haven't worked with Miss Liddell yet, so I will talk to her as well.
Okay, thank you.
I think before you go, just to reiterate kind of what Connie said, and I've heard a lot of
I still
comments.
have something after.
I know that, oh, you have a question?
You looked like you were wrapping up.
I was wrapping up.
So I was like, shall I speak
So
now?
go ahead with your
Okay.
question.
I just, I really appreciate that this came from school, like from the school building. These ideas were had in the school building and our principals brought them up to us. What I want to know is what kind of, have we gotten teacher feedback about this?
So when we first, we've actually been discussing this for several years about how and when we can implement it and if it's possible. And then in December, when we met, the responsibility of the principals was to go back and meet with their leadership team and have further discussion about that. And we got great feedback, and that is when they presented a letter to the superintendency and the directors to make that to make that adjustment. So that was the feedback that we received. Now, when it was rolled out, to be honest with you, each principal potentially rolled it out a little bit differently to their staff. And so that could have been, it all depends on how you roll it out as a principal, and you learn to roll it out differently each time based on the way you present it. So
I feel really strongly that when we have these kinds of things, if we want to avoid unintended consequences, we've got to be getting feedback from those teachers, because I think they'll see things that nobody else will see. And I think our students will too. And so I'm so glad that there was an effort to reach out to them. I think we need to get better at that.
sure.
And that we need to, our administrators need to learn how to not, because we often say like, tell me what you think about this, but then actually getting the real ideas, that's a skill.
Sure.
And so I think we need to get better at that. And I just wanted to say too, so I held student forums at Skyline and at Olympus about this. And for about a half an hour, we went through and they said all the things that were problems with this new schedule and all the, and then in the end I said, okay, so here's what you're going to get out of this new schedule. And here are all the problems. Now, who supports the new schedule? And it's like 75% of the people said, yeah, new schedule. We'll take whatever the problems are. We can handle those. So I thought that was a really good showing that students seem to really support it. And I would be interested to know where teachers are at on that, because I think if they really weighed it out, I really do think in the end they'd say, oh, I think I can handle these problems over here that are going to come with this. But giving them the opportunity to do that is important, I think.
Sure.
Well,
Okay.
and big
Done.
programs like this, I'll come to you, Nicole. Big programs like this, big switches, we really utilize our relationship with the GEA to float these. And that kind of is our built-in teacher feedback mechanism. Not that we can't, have our individual forums or those kinds of things.
And the
but we-
GEA looked at this? Did we get feedback from the GEA on this?
We give it to STAR. John's talked to him, and then Danny Sterlin also talked with STAR and shared with the presentation. I can only give you two examples of what I saw as far as a lot of teacher feedback and their reaction at Granger High School when they announced it. They'd been talking about it quite a bit, and they got almost a standing ovation. They were so excited. So that was very interesting. And then at Cypress High School, Miss Jones, I believe, is the GEA rep, and she was on board with that. President. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Anyway, she was very on board with it
Next year.
Not
before it
yet.
was rolled
Where's
out.
Mike?
So
Mike's over there.
There you go. I can't. Oh, there's Mike. Yeah. So just I just wanted to mention the GEA because we do. I mean, these big things we've got to communicate, and that's the natural forum to gather that teacher feedback. Nicole.
Sorry, my last comment is very much along the lines of Julie's. I just had some comments from some teachers, and it's not that they don't support it or aren't excited about this, but it was just more like they felt like they were blindsided by it. So anytime that we can loop teachers in, and even parents, I don't know if it was taken to the community councils or how this was, I just know that a few years ago when this happened with the junior high schedule, at least some of the communities had a really like, wait, what you're doing what? And didn't feel like they had a say or didn't feel like they had any input into it. So it just, I really would like to know that we're including our teachers when we're problem solving this too, because I think if we have teacher buy-in, that's the key to this. So anyway, thanks. But thank you for working on it. I know you guys have thought this through a lot. So.
Yeah, this is exciting. I think so too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Board members, one of the responsibilities that you have is to approve land trust plans. Now, that's not a mistake when I say land trust to the trust lands. That's an acronym. So land trust plans. And those are coming up. They usually come to you on the consent agenda, but there's an explanation on how you can go through all of them if you want, or the ones in your precinct if you'd like. And Aaron's going to tell us a little bit about next year's land trust program. Aaron, please.
Now, I believe we approved these didn't we approve the land trust plans for this year on the last
No,
thing?
there are amendments.
those
to
were
land-
amendments,
There's
that's right.
amendments that happen all the time.
Okay,
As community
sorry.
Councils get together and amend them, those come. But I think the big one for next year is coming on the 15th agenda.
That's correct. So yes, this presentation is to assist the board in its duty to explore and approve land trust plans. And so I'll describe what that looks like from your perspective, especially if board members new to their role. And then, yes, it will, my understanding, be on the June consent agenda to approve those plans. So my role is to assist you with that. So just, I'll also provide some context for information board. Looking back at the last school year, we received this amount, which was given directly to schools on a per pupil allocation formula, and those final reports have been done, and that always feels good when we sign off. So change is effective this year. I'll describe these some context to these 4 points. For the first bullet point, prior to this school year, the language used to guide schools and boards in land trust spending is that their goals had to be in ELA, math, or science. But that wasn't necessarily true. The examples, schools could spend in any academic area, and now the examples and the statute reflect that flexibility. To the second point here, there's are some priority content areas that must be addressed first before schools apply land trust monies to other allowable but not prioritized content areas. In a high school, any initiative that supports graduation is allowable. So for example, if a high school puts supporting the fine arts program on their land trust plan, it's an allowable expenditure because students need fine arts to graduate. But if an elementary school is to put fine arts, they would need to first show how they're addressing ELA, math, and science before they can apply that funding towards fine arts. So there's some nuances to just be aware of. But this point speaks to the fact that there are some priority areas that need to be addressed first. Those don't necessarily need to be addressed through land trust money. It can be other pots of money, but they need to address those before other areas are, expenses go to those other areas. This third point is just historically, so you know, there was previously a $5,000 limit, expenditure limit on supporting behavioral goals in schools, and then it was increased to $7,000. And these expenditures included some programs like paying for Leader in Me or paying for part of a social worker contract, things like that. Now there is not a spending limit on those categories of behavioral components, but similar to what we talked about just a moment ago, schools still need to demonstrate that they are appropriately addressing ELA, math, and science before they expend in those other areas. And again, they can use other pots of money to do so. And then last in this slide, recall that our school community councils are tasked with several responsibilities other than school land trust goals and coming up with a plan. They review and approve safe walking routes. They plan for digital citizenship initiatives. And now there's an additional component that the state outlines, and that's a positive behavior plan that addresses the use of tobacco, alcohol, and electronic cigarettes. So those are the new updates from this year compared to last year.
So Aaron, years ago, remember Joan introduced PlayWorks, and I know they're one of the behavioral components, but I mean, we saw fantastic things with like office referrals going down and people playing, what is it called, Rochambeau, if they want the same book, or that conflict resolution.
Right.
Is it as simple as just tying some of that back to the academia part
Yes.
of it? And so that's still allowed. They
Yes.
just have to relate it back to ELA,
Yes.
seat time, all of that.
One way I look at it is every expenditure that at least crosses my desk has to relate ultimately to student learning. And principals need to explicitly make the connection. We are doing this and we are going to implement it with fidelity so that kids learn core standards. And Leader in Me is a way that they can build leadership abilities, structured play. Those expenditures are allowed, for example, under Land Trust or TSSA, but it needs to tie into academic goals.
Right, because if they're in class, they can learn, but if they're in the principal's office,
Yep, that's the thinking.
probably not learning much math.
Right. Yep, excellent. So other information, our funding went up by about 5.3%. USB updated their website so that now principals, they have entered in their school plans. As a part of the website update, just so you're aware, if you're looking for sites like Jones Center and Safe School, those are categorized not as school sites, but as programs, very important programs. And so with some of the changes of the website, the funding is allocated still to these schools, but they are subsumed under, a site. So Jones Center is under Hardwickson and they coordinate on their plan, and then Safe School with the YES program. So they still receive funding. The students that enrolled there still receive the benefit of Land Trust money, but they were consolidated. And then lastly, school Land Trust allocations are based on a Pew Purple allocation, directly proportional. So the money you receive is tied to the number of students based on your October 1st enrollment. So as you look on school plans and you notice, well, why does this school get more money? It's strictly tied to their enrollment.
A quick question that might be
Yeah.
a little bit off topic. With Safe School, I mean, obviously some of these are very, very small, these specialty
Right.
schools. Is there a community council that does approve that?
Yes, thank you. For every plan that you will see, even the smallest of schools, everyone has to have a community council that reviews school data, this needs assessment, and they come up with a plan and then outline their expenditures. And that's what you're seeing is the work of that community council.
This is a side question, but I've always wondered, what happens when you have a school where nobody runs for community council?
I happen to have been a principal at such a school. You beg and you say to parent, thank you for dropping off your child. Would you please be our community council member? And in those cases, we provide a lot of support to those parents, but we still need them to serve. So
There's unfortunately more than just one of those schools.
yes,
Maybe a third of our schools or more find themselves in that quandary from time to
Yep.
time. We've put a lot of emphasis on community council involvement and getting information to the district, but we've learned that in some, and it often goes from year to year. You'll have a really functional community council and then the next year you can't get anybody. And so at any given time, there's a significant percentage of our schools that are struggling to have a fully staffed, certainly on the parent side, school community council.
yep, I agree.
Is YESS, is that one school? Is that a group of schools? Can you help me understand that?
It's one school, an alternative placement school. Yeah.
Okay. And does it have another name besides?
Yeah, youth educational something.
Support school.
It's
Yes,
kids
yeah.
kids that are in state's custody who for some reason are not appropriate to be placed at a regular neighborhood school.
Yes.
But it is one physical location?
They have,
School?
it's, from my
Or are
understanding,
there several?
There's several.
it's several sites,
Okay.
one administrative principal.
One
oversees.
administrator, one principal, several sites.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So looking ahead to this year, our allocation went up slightly. Our school community councils, they have met, they've identified areas of critical need, they've set goals, they've planned expenditures, they've input these plans into their website that the state furnishes, and that's a modality we need to enter those plans. And they have been approved or vetted by my department with some coordination. Now they await board approval. We're at that point in the approval process. So some reminders that as I'm looking to approve plans, I find myself often going to our school community council handbook. It's hyperlinked there, but it's also on our communications website. And there are some hard and fast non-allowable expenditure items that the state outlines and some general guidance for allowable. Non-allowable are things like accreditation costs, facility or capital things, and then expenses that are non-academic, co-curricular or extracurricular. So you won't see those on plans. It's because, not that those things aren't good or important, but they're not allowable categorically. And then there's a list of allowable expenditures, but simply put, it's things that are academic in nature and lead them on a path towards graduation. And then what we'll view next, board, are instructions for you to log in and view as you like these plans, so that in the June board meeting that can be voted as a consent agenda to approve the respective plans. So I won't spend much time on the rest of this presentation, but leave it for you as a resource. We've coordinated with the state office. From this website, you type in your Granite email, and then you request an account, and then they will approve it because they know to watch for your email. You'll be kind of going through various prompts of creating an account and a password. And then there's kind of a back and forth where you request login, and then it's not long after it's granted. And then and then you'll get the email to confirm, and then you should be good to go. When you log in, you'll identify yourself as an LEA level user. I think that'll be predetermined for you, Granite District, of course. And then what you will then see is a list, and then a final activation. But just so you're aware, you can view previous plans for your interest, and you could compare historically what the schools, how their plans have maybe changed throughout time. But what you're going to look is a weighting review. And for every school, it's a weighting review, and then that's what you're looking at to see if there's any issues. I'll mention one more thing. The digital, as you go through, you'll find most schools have marked no on digital citizenship. That doesn't mean that they don't have a digital citizenship plan. They are, in fact, but that no means, well, we can provide a quality digital citizenship program or initiative to our school, but we don't need to apply land trust money. Either it was something that was free of cost, or we used other money to fund that. So when you see digital citizenship, no, it means they're simply not applying land trust funding towards it. Every school does have a digital citizenship plan. So that is my presentation. I'm here and accessible.
I have a question. So I've looked at these before, but I don't remember doing what you just showed us. It used to be a lot easier. So is this?
So if this is confusing and you already got in it, then don't worry about this.
Somehow it was just linked, it seems like, that we.
We click, okay, here you go. Boom, there's all the schools, so you're looking at this, I'm like, I don't remember doing all of this.
So if you got in, great. But all principals, because of the new website change, the state had to reset all passwords. And so if you haven't logged in recently, you'll need to do this process again. All of them were reset as the
So we might have to do it.
Absolutely, yep. My department, my wonderful secretary, Sandra Riches, we're here to help.
Yeah, I did this 2 days ago, but still don't have an email back that it's approved.
Okay, so
So
what I will do.
I'll talk with you, but I thought I'd throw that on.
But what I will do tonight, in fact, and thank you, Board Member Jackson, I'll email our folks at USB, because they're the first people that approve accounts. And so I'll make sure that they don't have any in queue, and then we in our department continue that approval process. So I'll follow up on that.
So,
And thanks for including this. I may
Maybe on the list of the state to not have.
to not give me access. Don't ask her, she's a pain.
So I guess my question is, are we reviewing all the schools? You want each board member to look at every schools, or are you looking for a sample? Or are you
New to my role, I'm not sure that.
I can answer that. Basically, we all have our precincts and we all have schools we oversee. So when you're approving the schools that reside within your voting precinct. However, it's not, there's no passwords to click on a school. I mean, my elementary kid's school is actually out of my precinct. And so I'm out, when they were there, I looked at their trust lands fund or plan all the time, even though it was technically Terry's area. And so there's no, but what I would recommend to you is really study those schools within your precinct. And then if you're curious, like I don't have a high school in mind, but it feeds into 3 high schools. So I always click on those as well.
Thank you.
so Aaron,
Yep.
when we click into them, you have already seen them, and your group has already said this won't be approved.
Correct.
You need to correct this or correct
Yes.
that. So we get to see the final finished product and approve whether we agree with what you guys have already agreed with.
Yes,
right?
we've trained principals what's allowable. If there is an issue, we've, a lot of phone calls and
Yeah.
emails. So what you see should be good,
Good,
but we want your, to,
right,
look at
we
that.
need to look
Yeah.
at them too. Thank you.
thank you, board.
I just have a side question. So am I correct in assuming that you were the one that was supposed to create a report to rule them all?
Yes,
The-
so what, yes.
And how does that work?
How does
in
that relate to what we're
conjunction?
talking about? I'm so glad you asked. How much time do you have? So
Uh-oh.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, okay, good. Every school needs to do a land trust plan by state law, and we must follow the guidelines set by state law and this platform. But aside from that, state law has required that there's a TSSA plan, an SSAP. It could be a Title I plan, a CSI plan, and then so on. So that you could have 4 or 5 plans per school site, do at different times. And so my department early on said, we can do a lot of good by consolidating these plans. And so we've hosted several workshops and trained principals this is kind of an anchor in terms of due dates and spending. And what we invite schools to do is to take your land trust plan and expand upon it. And it's been structured in a way to fulfill all other requirements. The state office likes it because it shows how we're doing blended funding and how there's just one, I like the Lord of the Rings reference I use often, one plan to rule them all. And it's been met very positively, and and it's much easier for us to support schools because we're talking about one comprehensive document. And I want to shout out to Dr. Bramble and her folks. One of principal's greatest things they like about it is we've pre-populated specific data for that school, where historically they've had to spend a lot of time themselves looking at that. So the assessment department has done a lot of heavy lifting for principals.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
thank you, board.
Board, before we do anything, we're going to take like a 3-minute recess, can we? Everybody, just a little
Yes,
break?
yes.
Thank you.
Well, it might be 5, but.
I just need to
It's been more than 3 minutes.
Terry, we heard your comment and we're gathering again.
I don't know what came over me, sorry.
I'm glad you're keeping track of time, Terry.
I'm
Great.
in a little 4x4 cubicle here.
I think we're just waiting for Chris. Nope, Connie. We're missing Connie.
Oh, we're not.
Go ahead. I thought we were all in here, but we weren't.
Connie has always been a troublemaker.
Both Connies, right?
You can say what you want about your aunt, Nicole.
I'm okay saying that, Terry.
Well, I agree.
Connie did?
Yeah.
Anderson?
I said, I know Nicole's telling everybody that I'm moving, and I am.
She is? Connie is moving to Ohio to be with grandbabies,
Are you kidding?
much to Lizzie's dismay.
Wait, you're Connie?
My Connie. Anderson.
Wow. Tell her good luck.
I will.
All right, we are ready to roll. Going to get back online, and our last item on our agenda today outside of the superintendent report is measuring student achievement and all the challenges that come with that. Is Rick giving this or Aaron?
Well, I think Rick,
Are you starting? Joan? Okay.
Thank you, board. You won't see a lot of me in this presentation. It's mostly Joan, but we wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present on this important issue. And earlier in the year, I presented to you as to the impact that money has or doesn't have on Title I schools. And we were exploring the practices and expenditures that yield the best return on investment, if you recall. And then we left on a cliffhanger. So before we can return and speak to you on the return on investment and what determine what really works in schools, we need to first have a conversation on how we measure success. And we'll hone in now on the role of assessment in measuring student learning. And then we'll look at the system of assessment in place in the state of Utah and its ability to provide some important outcome measures. And so reason for me being in front of you before Joan is just to kind of link in our minds the good question that you asked of our department to study and return on investment in schools. And this is an important preliminary discussion and presentation to have. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Bramble.
All right, thank you, board. Let's see. Oh, did I go the wrong way? There we go. All right, so assessment plays a really important role as one of the 3 critical components as we look at increasing student learning and achievement. So we have curriculum as defined by standards that we're teaching, and then instruction, which encompasses the strategies that we use. So the role of assessment here is really important as we look at determining how well the standards or curriculum are understood by students. And it's really critical as we consider how we move forward with our overall goal of increasing student achievement. So this role is important as we look at different types of assessment too. So this slide shows 3 different types of assessment that we typically talk about: summative, interim, and formative. The summative assessments we frequently hear about, there are things like the RISE tests, WIDA, ACT, AP. Those are those tests that are given typically at the end of the year, and they may be used for accountability purposes. While our formative assessments occur at the opposite end of that spectrum, and they happen frequently on a daily basis in a classroom as a teacher is continually looking for ways that they're going to change their instruction based on how they see their students performing or understanding the material presented. Now, in between that, we have interim assessments, and those are varied in terms of the frequency, and they can serve the purpose of helping a teacher inform instruction by predicting how well students are progressing towards the mastery of standards, giving them time to adjust course with their instruction. These are typically things like our Granite benchmarks that we've used to look at that. And each of those really do have an important purpose as we look at overall how we assess students. So during this year, assessment's been particularly important as we've tried to use this to identify some of the learning loss and other impacts that our pandemic may have had on student learning. So using some of the diagnostic assessments that we have, like Acadiance reading, we have been able to identify that early grades have been most impacted, both in our district and then at the state level too. We've looked at the data. And we've also noted a concern on the other end. Interestingly, in pandemics, we do find that throughout history, our youngest kids and our oldest kids seem to be most impacted by this. So the concern in the high schools that we could note was that there was a decrease in the number of kids that were enrolling in AP courses. So those data points were really important at the district and school level as we looked at how we were going to target some of our ESSER funds. And so looking at early literacy for our younger students. And then at the high school level, some of our schools are looking at how can we best prepare kids to feel like they're prepared to take those AP courses. So we'll continue to use assessments like these as we look at the upcoming year to see identifying students that need support, and then also looking at what strategies are most effective. So when we look at the importance of these, it's interesting to note that in this slide, the measurements that we're taking are really a sampling of a slice of student learning, kind of like an iceberg. So there's a lot below that waterline that the measurement is providing some evidence of. So this graphic shows that below that waterline, we have academic learning and social emotional learning, and they're really both intertwined. And so our measurements of learning are really reflecting both of those components. They're both really important. Schools spend time on both of these. And what we're measuring really is a reflection of that together.
Sorry, Joan, can I,
Yes.
is it, shall I
Go ahead,
save my
question.
questions till the
Sure.
end, or? Back on that other slide, you know, so are you saying that when we look at the RISE test or ACT or those summative assessments, they are also demonstrating social emotional learning?
What I'm saying is what we're measuring is a reflection of all of those put together, right? A student really can't learn material unless they're feeling comfortable and confident in the class. The teacher builds that community of trust and that feeling of comfort in the classroom in order for the content to be learned. So while we're measuring the content learned, I want to make sure that we're clear that all of these other things that we put in place in schools are also important. So kind of like
sort
if you,
of that in order to learn in Maslow's hierarchy, the bottom had to have been
Right.
met.
Yep.
And so if they're doing well academically, that says that those bottom.
Those lower
tiers are-
levels in Maslow's theory are
Yeah.
also being met.
Okay.
Yeah. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we're not forgetting about these pieces of social emotional learning. They're super important. And we recognize that they're intertwined.
I guess I'm not sure that I need to go home and think about that. Because one of my concerns is that sometimes our push for academic learning creates a social emotional discomfort that makes people, it creates a social emotional problem. You know, the striving for perfection, that's what I'm talking about. And so that a student does learn, but they learn out of fear, they learn in order to try to take care of those bottom levels. So I need to go think about that before I'm going to buy into it.
Yeah, and I think that to recognize that those assessments are an important piece of what we're teaching the student and the coping mechanisms that they're going to learn in order to deal with their feelings or stress or whatever the other emotional impacts that an assessment might have, I would say are equally important to their development on the whole. They need to learn how to cope with those situations too.
A 5 on the BC calculus test is not going to demonstrate that this kid's mastered social emotional learning. On the other hand, just saying it that way, mastered social emotional learning, doesn't really make sense. So, but on the other hand, a kid who's really done well on all of the tests and then gets a 1, or on all of the work and then gets a 1 on the BC calculus test, perhaps there's something social emotional going on that day, or there's been an event. But we've had long discussions. I don't know to what degree you'll go into this tonight, if at all. I'm not telling you have to, but just whether you do or not. How do we measure growth in social emotional learning? And so really, as we've wrestled with that, if kids are healthy academically and socially, that ought to manifest in academic growth and in progress. And I think that's what I'm seeing here, not that a high score on a test means that they're doing great with social emotional.
And I think that ultimately you can say the same with academic learning too.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
I'll just, yeah, I'm
Well,
on.
I think it's
I'm on
important
board with that.
to think about, for all of us to think about.
I asked Joan if I could share this so that when you're thinking about this tonight, this might be of interest. One of the hats I wear is I oversee the effective teachers in high poverty schools. So it's awarding teachers if they have a MGP of over 70 in one category or more. And my department, we interviewed teachers and we said, why do you think you're so successful, or what's your secret? And without fail, all of those teachers spoke to blending the two, like we create this community. And so I think teachers by and large, especially if they've kind of connected some dots, I think those teachers would agree on this model. So anyway, thanks for letting me share that, Joan.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so this slide speaks to the Utah accountability system, and it's been around for a while, and it's been driven by legislation both at the state and federal level. The state accountability system has improved over the years, and it includes more than just proficiency. It's become broader and includes things like growth, and then we also assess some targeted populations in recent years. So our current system looks like this. We have a separate system for our elementary and middle schools and for our high schools. So if you look, they have some similarities. We have proficiency that makes up approximately 1/3 of the model for elementary and 1/4 for high schools. Growth is another 1/3 at the elementary level and 1/4 at the high school. And we also include growth of our lowest 25%. These 3 components are measured using the RISE assessments for 3rd through 8th graders and Utah Aspire Plus for 9th and 10th graders. So at both levels, we also consider the progress of our multilingual learners. That one is measured by the WIDA test, which is given in January. Our high schools include a few more elements. They look at graduation, ACT performance, and the percent of students receiving a C or better in AP, IB, concurrent, and those completing a CTE pathway. It's important to note here, I think, that we consider more than just high school graduation, when we look at high school performance. There are a lot of pieces to that. So these components have become really important points for our department as we help schools to look at their own data and set goals, celebrate successes, and track their progress along the way. Our district's focus on teaching to the standards and looking more carefully at our multilingual learners has helped align, I think, those efforts as we look at that overall metric of accountability as an important tool, and hopefully making it, rather than a hammer to enforce compliance, perhaps more of a flashlight to help us identify how we're doing. So to that end, our department has developed some ways to help schools look at this a little bit more carefully. This slide shows you how school principals and communities can look at trends over time on their overall accountability, and then also determine how close they might be to a cut score for the bottom 5 or bottom 3%, so that they can look at avoiding some of the state sanctions. We've also looked at helping schools look at some of the component parts of that accountability system so they can look more carefully at some of their strengths and the potential goals or strategies that they maybe need to look at to address specific needs. And then also looking at some of these school accountability measures have allowed us to look at, well, in addition to the whole school, also some individual goal setting. And so this shows you an example of how we were able to break down some of those measures. And this one is looking at our multilingual learners and how they were progressing on their WIDA test scores. So schools were able to look at overall score changes and then identify maybe areas of strength or areas that they maybe had done something in the school to impact a change. So in this slide, you see one of the areas of the WIDA test is speaking. So in a school that I was working with, that speaking score was actually going down. They were getting worse in their speaking abilities. So we put in place some things like having the students speak into a microphone, recognizing that, wow, this is something that maybe they just don't have experience with that particular technology. And so we put that in place. We had some other things that we were doing really to influence that speaking. We looked at the scores and then we're able to see, wow, they really shot up in speaking. So this was a great way to be able to see some of those strategies and the impact that it had. On the other part of this slide, you see an individual goals sheet, which was also developed to help individually look at a student's scores and their trend line. Principals were super excited to have this, to be able to sit down individually with students and do some goal setting and say, hey, look, you're really doing a great job in this particular area. You just need to keep working in another area, and maybe we can get you up to that point at which you can show the progress that you need to show.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Since you have WIDA up there, why is WIDA so early but considered still a summative assessment?
So summative refers to more of the purpose of the test. It doesn't really mean when the test is given. It's an end of a level type of a test. So this is a way to look summatively at a point in time. So it's given each January. So it doesn't matter when in the school year it's given. It's more of the purpose of the test. It's to summatively look at how we're doing with our multilingual learners.
Is there a qualification as far as they have to be in their school for a certain amount of time in order for them to be held accountable for that? Or do they just give it to everybody or report? How does that report work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we look at giving that, and sometimes it does become a baseline based on when the student entered the school. We also look at that previous score to help us determine the progress they need to make based on the number of years they've been in, what their initial score was. So there's a lot that goes into determining whether or not a student is making adequate progress in that particular element.
So WIDA is kept, so you said about keeping track. This is state. So does the WIDA score, if they're in one school now, but they were in a previous school the year before, do you have access to the score before?
We do,
That's
yes.
when-
Yes, so the state gives us access to that, and then it's attributed to that school's accountability based on being at that school for a specific amount of time during the year. Yeah.
So will we ever say, okay, like this student did super well on listening, but they did poorly on the other, that next year they can say, oh, your listening's okay, we're only going to give you the other 3 parts. Will we ever allow that?
We want to be able to look at every area each time, and because it's a standardized test, it has to be given in a specific way. So each of those component parts are put into an overall test score for that student.
Right.
And they develop at different, it's not unusual to have those development areas be different because of the way language acquisition happens. So they frequently will develop in specific areas at different rates.
Okay.
So I'm going to follow up on what Connie just asked, because I'm kind of intrigued by this. Does WIDA have prescriptive utility for an individual student? Can I look at an individual student's WIDA score and use that to design something specifically for that child? Or is WIDA better globally to help us have larger strategies?
Yeah, and hopefully that it does both, right? We can look at it in this global way where I said, hey, overall, this school is really missing something in speaking. We also look at it individually as we do with these individual reports. And we can say, in fact, I would group students together based on how they were performing in specific areas of the WIDA to be able to provide that additional support. So it's really targeting support based on an assessment. We do this with lots of assessments. I think what was eye-opening for a lot of our principals the past couple of years is looking at WIDA in a more purposeful way. They hadn't really explored that as much, recognizing that we have a large population of multilingual learners and they really needed to know more about how the test is given, the component pieces, how we're targeting instruction. So we're doing a better job with this particular component. I'm hopeful to see some good growth as we look at our results this year.
I think everybody resents testing for the sake of testing. And so I really value, and I'll say assessment rather than testing, assessment when it can give us individual and also group instructional hints and pathways and give us something that we can do rather than just that can inform us, that can inform our instruction, that can help me know what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well. And then at a PLC, we can work together and Karen can say, Martin, can you help me on this piece? And I say, yeah, if you'll help me on that piece, because we have something tangible that we can collaborate on and then help this individual student with. And that's what I'm really appreciating from your presentation. Keep going.
Yeah, so I think that's something that we found last year too, when we didn't have an opportunity to get those year-end test results. I was sitting in a building as a principal that year, and I had teachers that had been really not thrilled about assessments when they didn't have it. It was like they missed the end of the story. They said, but how did my students do? They really learned a value by not having it that year that they missed. They wanted to know how their students did. So I think there's lots of value in assessments that hopefully we can help teachers understand that in different ways.
Thanks. You get to hear from me for a slide or two. Something that's really powerful, I don't know if you noticed, but this picture is Principal Kissel at Moss. And she would sit down with her students and their WIDA growth targets and encourage them and say, this is how you did last year. And they would set goals together. And so there's individual student data can be really powerful for students. It's a really neat thing that she does. So I wanted to, I feel it was more than serendipity that we're talking about land trust at the same time that we're talking about student assessment. Board, as you're going to be reviewing these plans, you'll find that schools had to set goals, and without fail, the schools are setting goals hoping to improve some part of how they're measured on the school accountability system. And because we want to make sure the money through land trust and other sources helps schools improve in those ways. And so really without these summative data, like Dr. Bramble said, we miss the end of the story, and schools aren't able to fully meet state requirements and federal requirements in doing needs assessments and charting goals. And so I wanted to highlight that here is that, and I borrowed some language from various funding sources that I oversee. Schools evaluate test results and other assessment data to identify most critical academic needs of students. That's what their responsibility is under land trust. Similarly, under TSSA, schools have to set specified goals and criteria for improving performance within the state accountability system. So these metrics we're talking about. And then they, of course, develop plans to improve school outcomes. And then they can understand both at a student level and a school level, even PLC level, their overall performance relative to expected growth for general populations and specific populations. I want to speak for a moment about this last point, having an early warning for turnaround in CSI schools. These summative data is the measuring stick used to say to a Title I school, you will receive a sanction status or you're getting out. Relating back to that analogy of the tip of the iceberg, other good things can be taking place, but unless those good things equate to improved outcomes measured by the state accountability system, the federal government, they say, no, we need to see improved outcomes as measured by your state accountability system. So that's kind of where the rubber hits the road. So I wanted to mention that, and then I had one more slide for, I'm sorry, go ahead.
CSI alert.
Oh, thank you. So CSI is a comprehensive school improvement school. So if you're a Title I school and if for 3 years you score in the bottom 5%, the cut score compared to all schools in the state, then you become a CSI school, which is a sanction status, and there's improvements, but ultimately it's a sanction. Yeah.
Is the state still changing that every year? So
good question.
Someone will never, I mean, there will always be.
Yeah, so you're talking about perpetually having a bottom 5%. I'll answer your question in a different way. Because of pandemic related or pandemic tainted data or an absence of data, there exist summative waivers that exist. And so the state is not, or the federal government is not classifying new CSI or turnaround schools this coming fall, and maybe not even the next fall, because they recognize that with a gap year, that's problematic, but also pandemic has disproportionately affected certain communities. But when these sanction statuses return, whether it's in the fall of 23 or the fall of 24, depending on if the federal government accepts USBE's waiver, those will come in play, but it's possible that that upcoming cohort might look different. And so we can't speak to it because the legislation hasn't been written for the next CSI turnaround cohort. Thank you. Here, I wanted to highlight that the state accountability system allows us, rather than looking at the inner circle, if we look at the questions on the outside, the state accountability system allows us to answer important questions that we are asking. So we can naturally attribute a question to each of the components. For example, we talked about WIDA. And so if you look at that question, how well are English language learners in our school learning English? A very good indicator to answer that question is how they're performing on the WIDA access test, which is that top green triangle. And this is not only, we've talked about sanctions, but rewards. So the state office acknowledged multiple Granite schools this year because of how they were doing on this metric right here. And we received blue ribbon schools, exemplary schools, because of their success in that component part. And then it became a conversation, one school to another. What are you doing? How are you investing your resources so that your students are doing that? Without these summative measures, we're limited in having those conversations, not just among ourselves as a district, but it's the same metric used statewide. And so there's wisdom in focusing on these metrics. Again, it doesn't measure everything, but it's an indication, excuse me, I keep bumping this. It's an indication of how underlying things are taking place or what is taking place. In my last slide, before I turn it back to Dr. Bramble, I want to reiterate that it's important to know how schools are achieving overall. The last slide mentioned the component parts of elementary schools. Those same component parts and questions relate to high schools, but recall high schools have 3 additional questions and 3 additional component parts that relate to a rigorous course taking and high schools and high school graduation. So these are important ways to, or these are important metrics to add to that high school. Now also note that not all of these categories are weighted equally, and the purple slices align with our district's charge of having students prepared for college, career in the 21st century. And note that while high school graduation is important and that capstone event, there are other things that lead to high school graduation that we need to focus on. So each tells a story about that analogy, what's below the tip of the iceberg, and allow us to have the conversation of what's working in schools, and as it relates to my specific role of how schools are aligning funding to those component parts to get a good return on investment.
Aaron, I'm kind of hearing you say something I've never heard your department say before, and I'm remembering your predecessor's predecessor in this room making presentations about the state accountability and the federal accountability systems and how those were bogus and they hurt kids and they were bad for schools, and I've heard the both of you say a couple of times tonight, I'm inferring from your comments that you don't think this is a bad system, that there's perhaps value in this and we ought to look at it.
Yes. In fairness to the predecessors, this system has improved drastically over time. So, and
That's a good diplomatic answer.
yes. So
I'm just setting you up for that answer.
yeah. To the point where now our department looks at it as a reliable measure, and some of the historic issues that are becoming more reflective of good. If a school is adhering to research-based evidence practices, our opinion, which we believe is sound, they will see those outcomes reflected in these areas. And so, yes, you're correct, Dr. Bates, so that we buy in and then we support schools in making sure that their efforts and funding yield to improved outcomes measured like this. So,
To the point of your, excuse me, diplomacy, Aaron, how long have these weightings been in place that are currently shown?
So we debated, we had a slide and it showed the robust history. We thought that might be too boring, but lesson learned for future presentations.
Thank you for calling me boring.
No.
Guilty as charged, by the way. The question is just how long have these current weighting percentages been in place?
Oh, this model, 17, 18?
4
Oh,
years ago.
I think 2017, 18, right? Yes, yes.
Very good.
For those that might not know who that is actually, that answer came from Dr. Rich Nye, who is our incoming superintendent in the room today, effective July 1st. So thanks, Rich, for being here. All right. Yeah, and I just have additional resources. Actually, that history of school accountability is linked right here. So if you want to know, or, sleep well tonight, maybe you want to. Joan, scoot over to the microphone so our online people can hear you. There you go. Okay. So yes, this slide just gives you some additional resources if you want to take a look at some of these. Other questions?
No, I just say thank you. I'm sure many, many principals have to be taught and tutored on how to use these assessments. But knowing that even years ago, if principals were able to see the assessments and use those, their scores were very, very good years and years ago. So to be able to put the focus on and to train and help principals see them, thank you. Thank you very much.
And they both said something about aligning resources. So as we look at schools and see growth in an area, that can help us. Align resources is code for where you spend your money. And as we have TSSA, and you showed hundreds of thousands of dollars in some schools in land trust monies, if we can spend those in targeted ways that move these very needles, and that's a real positive thing.
I'm really interested to look at those metrics and it's interesting to see how they work. And now all it's done is make me curious as to where we are on those metrics. And I'm interested to see where our needle sits. And part of me, one of the things I've been looking for in these last 4 months of being on this board is in my company, we kind of have identified if these things are in place, then we're going to succeed. And I've been looking in our district, what are those things? What could that, and maybe this kind of is going to lead me to that a little bit. I don't know, but it's very interesting to look at those because those are very specific measures that we're looking at there. I also just wanted to say, because I think that I get carried away with data, not like you guys do, but I do get carried away with data. I get excited about it. And I think it's really important for us to always remind ourselves that there is stuff that requires resources that does not have data attached to it. We can just never measure. And it's so important to put the resources there anyway. And our principals should never be afraid to do that where they need to do it. They need to take the initiative, use their judgment, and say, this one will not affect this pie, but it's important and we're going to do it. Or it might affect it, but we can't show how it does really. Because we're so serious about accountability, and I support that and I want to see it. But also, I just think we got to remember that some of it you can never really be accountable for, you know.
Julie, the superintendent highlighted, and I just want to reiterate because I feel strongly about this as well, is that narrative around Utah State accountability system is changing. And as it's gotten more sophisticated and as it's gotten to be more multiple measures, it's doing a better job of what you exactly articulated.
Hitting the nuances.
Yeah, it's complex. The reality is measuring learning is complex and there's a lot to it. So the better the assessment, the closer you're going to get there, but you can't sell it as it's absolutely the only thing. Multiple measures, and you saw just from the pie visual how it's incorporating many things. It's getting better and better, and we need to change that narrative of this does have value.
And to agree with Rick's comment and also your comment, I would not disagree, but qualify a statement that you made, because we may not see the result of an expenditure right away. I think ultimately everything that we spend money on down the road, if not this year and a future year, will yield improved outcomes. For example, you'll find some veteran principals, especially in some at-risk communities, see the value in providing extended kindergarten, because they know a few years down the road, those kindergartners may have better outcomes, but we don't measure kindergartners on the RISE assessment, right? And so I would agree with you, but I'd say every expenditure, if not now, soon will, or down the road, will lead to improved outcomes measured here, but there might be a delay of a couple years.
I think that one of the points I wanted to make is that you may not ever be able to connect it. You may not be able to in third grade say that's because we had full-time kindergarten, but you kind of know, like you kind of know that that's what it, or that contributed.
Well, I'm thinking outside the box too. I think that, we have the obvious ones that you can measure and that you get the results from, but thinking outside the box, that there might be something. And I think the Beverly Taylor Sorensen program is very valuable. And as I watch like our dance teacher teach them dances about land formations and things, I think it's very valuable what you're saying. Absolutely. I just have a question. As you talked about, I appreciate, Dr. Bramble, that you talked about how you had teachers make that comment that they actually understood and valued that. I hope that's a change in attitude that we're seeing with this pandemic. But I do wonder, how often are these summative assessments, the RISE, the ACT, well, maybe not the ACT as much, but mostly the RISE and some of those others that we have in the lower grades, are they passed on? Did new teachers see them? How well do we do at following up with this? Because I feel like if we're not going to use the summative data aside from what we see from the state, we're not using our data very well.
Yes, and that's something that I think our department is really charged with, is making sure that those data are used in helpful ways. And there's different ways that we can look at that summative data to drive what's happening. For example, a school can look at their summative RISE scores and dive into that data and look at category scores and see what a difference maybe some new strategies that they put in place had. They can also look forward with that and say, this is what our students look like that are coming into the school year, and use that to help inform how they're going to approach some of the things that they're going to do in the following year. Important also is all of the other assessment types, and the formative pieces really you're seeing in research are really important. We need to continue to look at that summative as that end goal, but formatively, we're looking at a lot of really great ways to be able to see, are we on track to get where we want to be at the end of the year? So the day-to-day things that schools are doing inside a classroom, and then the interim pieces where we're doing those check-ins to see how close are we to getting where we want to be at the end.
Sure.
And they help us set those goals and then
Sure.
celebrate when we achieve them, right?
I guess I just really want to know, are we using that to its full potential? Are we passing that on? I mean, you say they can, but are they?
Oh.
Are they using that?
Yes, I can say yes, we are. I'm right now putting together some ways for every school to look at their data. A lot of the reason why we don't have great data use is that it's not always visible, right? We need to be able to make that data visible so that teachers can use it to inform their instruction, and schools can use it to see how they're doing. And so the more we make that data visible, and that's really what I think the department has been doing this year, is pushing that data out in very visible ways so that it can be utilized.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's very valuable. Thank you.
And I would guess that is probably used better in the elementaries, but once they get to secondary, it's a little more difficult to say, take all of your students' reading scores and then look at those and then help that inform your instruction on a secondary level. Does that make sense? I'm trying to think of how this would look on a secondary level.
We did it. We sat down as a faculty and we looked at our scores and we noticed that reading was our low, or writing was. And so we, as a faculty, decided as a school, we're going to do writing in every classroom. So we all learned the 5 traits. We learned, and we all did writing across the curriculum. And I mean, that was our response to it. So it wasn't evaluating specific students, but
Yeah, that's what I thought you were talking about.
We're missing if we don't use that data, we are missing, the value of it anyway.
I feel like I see that a ton in all the schools that I have been to. Like I see their data in their faculty rooms or wherever their staff meets. It's like posted. And I think that's really exciting. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah, and I'll have to say that our secondary schools are also reaching out, and they are using this data in the ways that Nicole spoke to, as well as individual data sheets. In fact, our junior highs were really excited about getting these and being able to sit down with their students. They carried their sheets around with them to look at how they did in past years on their RISE test and set a goal for themselves for this year. So I think we're getting better at that at all levels.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about data, well, I think the important thing, there's a lot of cool things about the data, but I think we have to always think of data that they're not just numbers on a paper. I mean, every piece of data represents one of our students, or a classroom of students, or an entire school of students, or a network of students, however you're quantifying whatever group. And so behind the numbers, it's the students, and we're charged with having them ready to leave our system, ready for their future, be it college, whatever other career trade they come with. And so I think both, just a minute, to Julie and Nicole, both to your point is exactly that, is how can individual teachers, how can a group of teachers or faculty sit down and ensure that you're taking that data and making good of it? Do you have a comment?
One of my principals that I worked with, he made a scatter plot of how all his students did on the RISE test. And so every single student's score was on the scatter plot, but their dot was their photo. And it changed the way we looked at that data, because we were like, oh, are you kidding me? Juan is right. You know, he's doing a great job, or whatever it was. We saw their faces with the data. It changed everything. I wanted to just know also, where do special ed kids fall on that? I assume they're just mixed in. How is their growth? Are they at grade level? Did they graduate? I mean, there's no, because I didn't see them broken out anywhere on that.
Right, and they are not broken out in terms of how we look at accountability. They're included in those measures with a caveat of, except for some of our most severely disabled students are not, but those that are taking the RISE test, their results are included in with all of the other students. They might be also counted in that lowest 25% if they sit in that category too. So they account for growth, they account for each of those categories too.
Thank you so much. We're just, I couldn't be more excited with this. This is, how long have you been in your positions now? 2 years?
It feels like it. No, since July.
Oh, July. See how time just gets away from you. But I know, probably feels like 10 years. But what a chore you guys have to come in July on the heels of COVID and not having some of the data, but that's your department, that's your responsibility. So I think what you've put together tonight for us is absolutely fantastic. And we're excited. Martin speaks very highly of you too and your department, just so you know that. And we're excited to just see where you can take it and bring us along the way and keep us informed and however we can help. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, board.
Yep.
Next on our agenda is a superintendent report from Dr. Bates.
I don't have anything to report other than that we have need for an executive session for purposes of collective bargaining strategy.
All right. I will entertain a motion.
I move that we move to executive session for the purposes of collective bargaining strategy.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a motion and a second to go into executive session for the purpose of collective bargaining. This is a roll call vote. Terry, we're going to start with you.
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
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 And I am a yes, so that is a unanimous to pass to go into executive session. So
Thank
now.
you. Thank you here all for coming. I'm going to